Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Stuck in a Bit of Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Uncle AK.
And I'm Reflex. Welcome. Definitely want to thank everybody tuning in this week. Stuck in a Bit of Podcast. Do follow us on all social media platforms, SITM Podcast, and share the links and screenshots with your network, that help us grow in that way. And we'd love to hear from you if you have questions, concerns, or a guest referral. It's SITM Podcast 237. That's the email. And definitely want to let you know this episode is sponsored by Perfect Office Solution. They provide affordable professional office space for entrepreneurs in the DMV area. So if you're looking for office space, you let them know we sent you. Use promo code SITM Podcast. You get 10% off your lease. This sponsor this podcast. We are grateful for that. And they are also hosting us for our 100th episode coming up on October 7th in the Laurel location. So, look out for an email for day ones, come out and party with us. You excited for that, bro?
Yeah, definitely, man.
It's been a journey. I'm definitely
excited. Yeah. It's not easy, but
I think we passed 100 episodes, but Africans got.
No, we have passed 100 episodes.
Africans gotta find a way to party somehow. But yeah, definitely hit us up on our social media platforms, and we have a special guest in the building, bro. You want to let them know who we got in the building?
Yes, sir. She is the founder and president of Black Millennials for Flint. Listeners and watchers, welcome LaTricea Adams to Stuck in a Minute Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You got a flight coming up, so we gotta hit you with these questions. Quick. Yeah. How do we, I just want to start deep. How do we get here to the point where we have this problem, that your organization, Black Millennials for Flint, is addressing?
So I think that one of the things that the United States in general struggle with is a space of complacency, meaning that a lot of times there's this sense of superiority and arrogance that some of the things that we look at, for example, with water quality, is an issue that's not an American issue. Mm-hmm. And it has become extremely clear that it is. And it took something like the Flint Water Crisis to kind of shake us up, and also kind of shedding light on issues around lead, not just in water, but also in housing and soil and consumer products that kind of go outside of the realms of Flint. So it kind of is triumph in tragedy. Part of our namesake pays homage to Flint because that really did kind of rock the nation around lead awareness and caused us to kind of look into our own communities and environments to think about, are these some of the issues that are impacting us as well? So,
I just want to go rogue a little bit, just to clear this doubt off my head. Is Flint made national news, right?
Correct.
But I'm sure it's not just Flint that's suffering from lead water. So
Right.
What are some other cities in the U.S. that are suffering from?
So almost all black and brown cities, but even in the DC area, huge issues around lead and water, specifically in our schools and our child care facilities, which is extremely dangerous. So lead is, of course, toxic to all humans, but specifically children who are 6 and under. They're in the most foundational stages of their life. They're the most at risk. There are also issues around lead and water in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, also a city that is almost 70% African and African American. There are also issues of lead in the water in Baltimore and Philly. Just really thinking about some of those cities where you see people who look like us are disproportionately impacted the most. So it's certainly not an issue that just exists in Flint. It's kind of all over.
Want to get to know you a little bit, before we come back and unpack all of that. Originally from Memphis, Tennessee.
That's true.
Was a teacher before you moved to DC. Mm-hmm. Bilingual.
Yes.
Spanish and English.
Yes.
How did you get here? What more is there to know about LaTricea?
Sure. So I did teach. I taught in Nashville, actually. I taught middle school and high school. High school's a little bit tough. I was actually 22 when I first started teaching, and I taught high school first, and I learned quickly, no, let me go be with some younger ones. At one point in my life, I thought that I wanted to be a school principal. And even with my move to the district or to the DC area, I still kind of had in my mind that I wanted to be a principal. Like I interviewed in Fairfax County, and I was like, I don't really want to work in Fairfax. No shade, but that just isn't my way.
I don't know if anybody wants to leave a work in Virginia. I'm just throwing that out there.
And then for being like a place like Memphis, that's the exact opposite. So it's like I don't know if I really want to work in that environment. But I actually decided that I wanted to work in a different capacity and had an opportunity to work for a really dope school in DC. It's actually a network of charter schools called Cesar Chavez Public Charter Schools for Public Policy. I know that's a mouthful. But really what made that school so amazing is that it had this civic engagement and public policy aspect of the school, where we legit would have students before they graduated, they had to present a thesis like grown people around public policy issues of their choice. And that was so inspiring to me. And in that moment made me feel like I don't really want to be a principal. I want to be able to kind of impact our school system from a systemic perspective, as opposed to kind of just isolating it into one spot if you just worked at a school. And then after leaving Chavez, I had an opportunity to work for DC Public Schools in their district office, specifically around compliance and accountability for our special education and ESL population, which, so oftentimes those babies fall in between the cracks. So really looking out for our students and making sure that their rights were being exercised appropriately. Fast forward, I did move from the East Coast back to my old stomping ground, back to Memphis, where still working in education for our local school board, still around compliance and accountability. Yeah.
Just before we went live, we're talking a lot. We're talking a little bit about Memphis, Tennessee, and we hear a lot about it, from rap music and all these different crimes and all whatnot. But what is it like in Memphis, Tennessee?
Yeah, so
people
Memphis
like me
definitely
who
gets a bad
don't
rap.
think about flying to Memphis. I think about ATL, New York. I'm not thinking about going to Memphis. I'm just kidding.
Oh man. So there is a ton of history that exists in Memphis. Probably the thing that I'm the most proud of from being from Memphis is its presence during the civil rights movement. I think a lot of times, especially like this being the 50th year from the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. It was through activism with the sanitation workers strike that caused MLK to come to Memphis. So it was a very interesting dynamic growing up in Memphis with this very unapologetically black type of environment, which made it enough shade on Nashville, for example. When I did live in Nashville, it was definitely a different climate because, yes, Memphis, has its share of poverty. There are instances where crime happens frequently that is because of poverty, but there is such great history and promise in that city, where we're definitely a city of resilience. There's a lot of great people that come from Memphis. Memphis definitely is a musical city, also not just rap music.
Oh,
We
yeah,
have some
definitely.
dope rappers from Memphis, but I think about the Stax Museum where Isaac Hayes recorded. There were instances where Aretha Franklin also recorded there as well. Also, from a musical perspective, from an old school point, Memphis was one of the stopping points for what's called like the Chitlin circuit, where during Jim Crow, if you kind of wanted to make it big, Memphis was one of those stopping places where there were actually venues where black people could actually perform. So some of the greatest black artists of all time, like Ray Charles, for example, did lots of shows in Memphis. So that's some good things.
How did you get to Black Millennials of Flint? What was the inception of that? I know, of course, Flint, Michigan, but for you coming as a school teacher and everything that you just share with us, how did that spark in you?
Sure. So, Black Millennials for Flint definitely came from a point of frustration and anger. So, in December of 2015 is kind of, in November of 2015 is kind of when the general public began to learn more about the Flint Water Crisis, even though it actually started in April of that previous year in 2014, but we didn't know anything about it. It's a lot of stuff that kind of plagues the black community, but it was just something about this particular issue that really like hit me in the gut and hit me in the heart, where thinking about like it being at that particular time, it's 2015, and like we still have people that don't have access to clean water, and then on top of that, like paying astronomical water bills for water that is completely corrosive. And so at that point in time, I felt like our historical black organizations weren't standing up, like weren't saying anything, in some instances like not even providing immediate resources. And so we were like, we're not gonna wait on the old school leaders, we're just gonna do it ourselves. And so the first thing that we did was we partnered with an organization called the Buffalo Urban League Young Professionals in New York, and we also partnered with Target, where we distributed water to Flint, because logistically it can get really expensive. Like I know a lot of people wanted to like pack up trucks and like physically go to Flint, but that's real crazy. So that was the first thing that we did. But then very shortly after that, going into the beginning of 2016, we were like, okay, this is not just the Flint issue around lead. It's everywhere. It's definitely like on the East Coast and every black and brown place that you can think of across the nation. And so in February of 2016, on February the 10th, 2016 is when the movement actually started, where it moved beyond just providing immediate resources to Flint, which is what we still do. But it was also around political advocacy, where we felt like we needed to help hold our elected officials accountable. Like we paying tax dollars. Why are we still drinking water with lead in it? And so here in the DC area, we were able to help to get some legislation passed called the DC Childhood Lead Prevention Amendment Act of 2017, which makes it mandatory for lead testing and water to occur in all schools in DC and child care facilities. And so part of our work now is to replicate that. There's only about 10 states in the entire country that have mandatory policies or legislation around testing for lead in water. That's scary.
Wow.
So that means
That
like
is scary, yeah.
40 states. Like they don't even know like what exists as far as lead in schools.
You would think, something like water is this basic need, necessity needs. Like
I
the
mean,
government
like,
will be responsible for just,
It's crazy. We
Yeah.
think it's crazy too. So we're trying to spread awareness. So we appreciate having platforms like this, where we really want people kind of to wake up and not just think that, oh man, that's messed up what's going on in Flint, but like it really could be messed up what's going on like in your own hometown. So
How do you start by, creating a platform like, well, you've just explained about how do you actually get other people to come with you along this journey? Like, how does that happen?
So one thing that is really important is around how things are messaged. So lead is like not kind of like the hype type of movement. So we live in a space where like police brutality is something that often catches people's attention as far as like activism and advocacy. So we spend a lot of time around marketing. So I'll give you an example. Back in April of this year, we did a policy briefing. And like, a policy briefing is typically a little bit boring. Like people might not want to turn out for that. But that was around the time like when Black Panther still was hype. And so we were like, let's do a Black Panther brunch. But really this is a policy briefing. And so we really try to come up with innovative ways with like my team all being like relatively young and being millennials, like thinking about ways like how do we want to receive information as opposed to like your traditional ways of engagement on a topic that it's very layman for folks. Also, we have a lot of support from the social media perspective, where that definitely is one of the hugest ways that we are able to kind of get the educational awareness out. Like, we've done like small video clips, like just like educating people on various things around lead. We most recently got a little bit of celebrity engagement where at our summit that we just had this week during Congressional Black Caucus, we had Van Lathan to actually participate in that summit. And he helps us to kind of spread that awareness. Back in April, I had an opportunity to participate in BroccoliCon with Broccoli City, where we had engagement with Amanda Seals, for example. So we have to really get creative around how we are kind of spreading our reach, where it's not kind of swept up under the rug, if that makes sense.
Are there other organizations out in Flint or DC or in Memphis that are doing the same thing? And how do you guys work together, for a common goal?
Yeah, so and this was pretty dope, but then also kind of sad at the same time. So we are the only African American and a Latino civil rights and environmental justice organization that solely focuses on lead. Literally, the only one. I know, right? Like in history, the only one.
I would have thought that.
I know.
Whoa.
When we found that out, we were like, really? At first we were hyped, but then we were like, no, that's sad actually. That it took so long for this work to happen. So essentially, we do plan around expansion. And part of that expansion is kind of building our network of people to do the work. So we did have an opportunity to launch something that's called the Lead Prevention Ambassador Leadership Program, where essentially we do training with young folks where they can kind of serve as a liaison between like their respective networks, but kind of like carrying our mission and vision and the educational aspect back into the community. So we're looking to replicate that program. It was piloted in DC, but we have plans to replicate it in Flint, Michigan, and also in Memphis. But then, of course, like more long term, replicate that in Black cities like across the country. But we've seen great promise with kind of building the next wave of environmental justice leaders who are Black people, because y'all, it's not a Black space in environmental justice at all. And a lot of times when we're not in front of it, we have other people who don't understand our culture, who don't understand all the nuances that are associated with just being Black, making policies, making laws. So we are excited about having an opportunity to kind of, I don't want to say infiltrate, but
infiltrate
those tables so that our voices can be heard in this movement.
I want to go out, and just ask a question. Somebody might be watching or listening right now and just like, man, like, what's the one way to just eradicate lead in a first world country? Because boiling water, I don't think helps.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that boiling water piece. So we actually, maybe like about 2 months ago, and this happens a lot throughout the country, where there could be some type of mishap that will happen in the city's water, and the city or the municipality will immediately do a boil water alert.
Right.
Here's the issue, and we've been really pressing folks about this. If it's lead in your water and you boil it, it makes it worse. It makes whatever lead was present in that water to be more potent and much more dangerous. So usually, like, we have tickers that will tell us, like, if a city has done a boil water advisory. If it's a city that's known to have lead issues, we immediately push back, like, against, like, the waterworks, like, within their particular city or municipality, trying to get them to change the guidance to community members, because it might be bacteria in the water, and if it's just bacteria in the water, yes, you boil it, but if it's lead in there, you kind of like fixing one thing and creating another issue.
Whole new monster.
Yeah, like we're just like who are working like in these various entities in these government agencies where there's a complete lack of regard around working with lead. I think that like as a country we have a lot developed around like bacteria, but this lead part is kind of just lingering out there. But to answer your other question around what to do to eradicate lead, we know exactly what to do. So it's not like an issue where researchers need to find a way, like we still don't know how. Literally, we know how. It's an issue of money and investment. So the infrastructure in the United States is old. And a lot of the issues specifically around lead and water is with pipes. It is a very expensive process to replace pipes, but it has to happen. Even like in a city like DC, where they have put a lot of money forward towards remediation through like water filters and things like that. But at the end of the day, the pipes still have to be replaced. Those same things happen in like Baltimore and Philly and Memphis, where we have to hold our elected officials accountable to say, you need to put this in the budget so that we can really eradicate it and not just keep patching it up.
They do have the money, right?
Right.
Just last year alone, DC made almost $2 billion in traffic tickets. You know what I mean? So
I got about 600 of my money in there. But DC is close to Maryland, though. Is there like some kind of, you know what I'm saying, like ticket I can put in my pipe upstairs right now and just tell if I have lead?
Yeah. So I will say that in the state of Maryland, in the district, there are the law is on your side as it relates to like your rights. So in the state of Maryland, you can get free water kits that can be sent to your home
to test it.
Test it, and then you would send it back in, and then like you would get your results. And then there are also guidance that's supposed to be provided from like your local city or county in the state of Maryland about remediation. Usually what happens, because it gets a little bit sticky if you are a property owner versus if you're renting. If you're renting, then it's the responsibility of like your landlord to ensure that the drinking water, the water that's on like their property is actually safe to use. So it's like a whole like set of steps that's a little bit different if you are renting. Now, if you are a homeowner, it gets a little bit sticky because some of that onus is on the individual who owns the property. So for example, if you do own your home or condo or what have you, and there are lead issues, you have to think about what's called excavation, like of pipes, which in some instances, some of that cost is assessed and you have to be responsible for it as a property owner. But at the end of the day, there are provisions for folks to get tests. Just that follow-up sometimes can be a little bit challenging. And that's also like some of the work that we do is to be a resource to folks that are like, I don't even know what to do to find out if I have lead in my water. Like if I have lead, like what do I do? But actually Maryland is really progressive as it relates to lead and water in some ways. Now, there's still an issue in the state of Maryland around this lead testing in schools. That's a huge, scary point for us, is because you don't have that same type of autonomy, you know, with a school as you do with your own home. And schools are managed like by federal, in some instances local funding. So that's kind of like where it gets really problematic, is those state funded and locally funded institutions and organizations that also like experience lead exposure.
You know, the fountain thing is that always stand, you know, in the corner, like in schools and stuff you drink off of. I've always wondered if those things get cleaned at all. You know
I'm
what I
always
mean?
skeptical about drinking in that
Yeah,
thing.
I'm pretty nervous.
But yeah, just for the, you know, so why you, as you just said that, whatever city you're in right now, listening and watching, you know what I'm saying, get one of those kids or what have you and test your water. Contact Black Millennials of Flint. The website is in the bio of this video, or, you know, and get cracking, man, because it's you can't drink it, you can't shower your kids, you know what I'm saying, it affects your kids, and it's serious issue. So make sure, you know what I'm saying, your water is clean, because it's important.
It is.
Just want to, you know, go back to the name Black Millennials of Flint. You know, it's speak on you know, that name, and how, and compare generational differences as it relates to advocacy when you think about the 50s, like you mentioned earlier, in the 70s. And the fact that we have to have such a thing as millennials, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just everybody wants to, you know, live the best life and turn up, you know, nobody's really thinking about, I don't know, or maybe it's the opposite of the way. How do you see it?
Yeah, so I think one thing that was really important to us with the namesake is, as much as people like talk about millennials like in pop culture, millennials are like on the move, where we are as a collective like not gonna accept a lot of BS. I think that when we begin to analyze like from a point of advocacy, generation to generation, no shade, but Generation X is just there. They they exist. There wasn't a lot of uprisings and movements for that particular generation. And then we know that the baby boomers were the immediate recipients of all of the work of the civil rights movement. A lot of times it's misconstrued that baby boomers were the ones that were on the front lines, like during the civil rights movement. Like with John Lewis and MLK and William Young, but those people are from the silent generation. They're not boomers. So I oftentimes have to collect our, you know, elders who are baby boomers about that. Like, you were kids during the civil rights movement. So one of the reasons why we wanted to have millennials in the namesake is to demonstrate like how this is a new movement and a new wake of people, a new era of consciousness where not only are we aware of issues that plague us regardless of race, but we're doing something about it. It's beyond just talking about it. And then the other part about the black part in that is that we just unapologetically black, where particularly in the environmental justice space, you literally rarely see Black people or Latino people. I mean, it is extremely rare, and that's problematic because these issues impact our communities the most. We should not have white people going in to advocate on our behalf. We have we have the capacity, we have the knowledge, we have the expertise to communicate what is needed in our own communities. So it's a lot of meaning behind the name.
I like it, by the way.
What is the most, or some of the most disturbing, you know, facts about the Flint Water Crisis that people don't really know about?
Yeah, so one of the most disturbing parts about the Flint Water Crisis is just the lack of trust that exists in the city, where when you kind of do a historical analysis of like day one, like with the Flint Water Crisis, and how there was just so much misleading information that came from the federal government, where connecting back when you talked about boiling water. So that was one of the first things that they told Flint residents to do, was to boil their water. And of course, you know, this is EPA, for example. This is the state that is giving you the information, like, to believe them, but then to later find out that like was completely adverse. Also, in addition to that, is the water still isn't fixed. And right now there's a lot of conflicting information amongst scientists, amongst other people who work in the activism and advocacy space, where people are saying that it meets like federal limits. But one, people still don't trust it, and they have every right not to. But then also, how can the water all be fixed when all the pipes haven't been replaced? So they estimate that all, quote unquote, all of the pipes will be replaced by 2022. This is 2018. So, I mean, how can we say that water is safe when we haven't even like completed the whole project to replace all the pipes. And then in addition to that, it's not just that simple. Like you have to flush the water out, you have to keep testing it to make sure that that is like the only source that's causing lead to be leached. And then like the last thing is the health impact. So when we went on our first trip to Flint back in April of 2016, it was very emotional to be on site. So we had an opportunity to meet this sister where she was pregnant with twins, and she unfortunately miscarried both of her babies because the toxicity of lead in her blood just, she couldn't sustain that pregnancy. And that was just heartbreaking to hear. This young lady also had a son who at that time I believe was 7, and her son had been suspended about 40 times at 7 years old. So when you think about the irreversible damage of lead, we don't even know like how a whole generation is going to even turn out because they've been poisoned so badly. So it's a lot that's still going on with the Flint Water Crisis. And then like we don't even know like what some of the things that are going to come up like as time progresses.
Yeah.
So
How would you, just to follow up on that question, describe what's happening in the EPA right now, Environmental Protection Agency?
I'm like, I don't even really know how to answer that question. So what I will say is before Barack Obama actually completed his term, Congress did provide a substantial amount of money to Flint in 2 ways. One was to go towards remediation and the replacement of pipes, but then there was some money that went towards health, particularly around children, like through CHIP. One of the issues that we see from an organizational perspective is when money is released from the federal government, we know that it's allocated by the state, right? Right now, Michigan is not the best source to allocate funding, because that was kind of like one of the reasons why the Flint Water Crisis even came about, is because the state of Michigan, particularly Rick Snyder, wanted to kind of cut some corners. So it's a very precarious situation as it relates to the money aspect. But then another issue that we see is the accountability perspective is completely absent. So you think about like a state that has definitely demonstrated that they can't handle a lot. And then you think about a city like Flint that is in strife right now. There's no like real oversight, meaning that there's not a lot of guidance that's provided to the city of Flint through the state of Michigan. And then it's that trust issue again, where the city of Flint is kind of like, I don't want to do anything that you tell me to do, because the last time that you told me to do something, look what happened. So there's a lot of it's very contentious as far as the relationship between EPA, the state of Michigan, and the city of Flint, because of the lack of trust, and then just like the sheer lack of clarity around accountability is just absent.
We hear a lot of people argue about what best bottled water to drink. So, with all the research, your team, your brand has been doing, what is the best brand of water to buy into the society?
That's a good.
So I don't know. So I'm gonna kind of take this response in a different direction. It's slightly controversial, but I'm not sure how much you know about Nestle. But Nestle actually, for only about $200 a year, Nestle, that's a multi-billion-dollar company, is able to get this pure water, because it's the pure state, right? Michigan, is able to get some of Michigan's water reserves to actually bottle and to sell. We're talking about where it's distributed and bottled is just miles away from Flint. At one point, Nestle was providing like bottled water to the city of Flint, but like there's no contingencies like where they have to do it. But as soon as you talked about brand, that's the first thing that made me think about that and made me get a little bit upset. Is that the biggest issue at hand right now is the privatization of water. It is very unfortunate that anybody who's paying water bills still would have to pay for quote unquote clean water. I don't think it's any like brand that's really good, because I want people to be able to live in a city where they can drink water out the tap.
Exactly, yeah.
It's difficult to even advocate for that. And then a whole other like separate issue is around the bottles themselves. So when you think about a Flint and all of these water donations, and the fact that for everything between like making like full meals, just your regular drinking water, that's a whole lot of bottles, right? Yeah. So it becomes
Years
a whole,
now, since 2014.
right. And bottles, plastic bottles are not biodegradable. It becomes a whole other environmental issue. One of the things that we learned very early is we tried to shift to like donating gallons of water, and also being a proponent for standalone filtration systems where people can take like refillable jugs as opposed to keep using bottles. It's just really tedious. There's a video, if you follow, and this is we love Little Miss Flint, aka Mari Kopeni, where she did a video around Thanksgiving, and you get to see her family preparing Thanksgiving dinner with all these bottles of water. It's heartbreaking. Just think about like how, like, especially you got a big family, how much water you use to prepare food, and you're literally using all of these bottles. I think that we have to be careful around inadvertently like supporting, and it's inadvertent, supporting the privatization of water, where I don't want the state of affairs to be where we are so afraid of the water that we still pay for that we're then like spending so much money on this resource that we are owed to have access to, that should be clean already.
How can people get involved with the Black Millennials?
Before you answer that, I'm just gonna say, let's just stop environmental racism.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That would be good.
I just had
to. If you are interested in getting involved with Black Millennials for Flint, as was mentioned before, you can visit our website. We do have contact information there. There are opportunities where if you live outside of Flint, you live outside of some of the other cities that I named, and you really want to kind of replicate some of this work in your respective city, just hit us up. You can also email us at info@blackmillennialsforflint.org, and that's the number 4. And we can kind of help people to mobilize some of the work that we've been doing in their respective cities and states.
Your Instagram name, BB Oshun.
Yeah, that's my personal one.
Yeah. What's the history behind that?
We shifted gears real quick. So, when I was in undergrad, I did, get my degree is in Spanish. And so my senior project was around studying the African diaspora in Spanish speaking countries, and kind of when I was doing some of that research, I learned about West African deities. And in that process, I learned about Oshun, and I was so enamored with
I
her.
even pronounce it wrong. Oshun. Oshun. That's African name. Oshun.
And she's just so dynamic, and I was like, that's me. And so that's kind of like the origins of that. And then the other part of that is I did used to be a teacher, so I used an alias so that some of my kids, can practice boundaries and not find me.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, that's tough. Now listen, Black Millennials of Flint is the name of the organization. We have had the privilege and honor of speaking with the founder and CEO, LaTricea Adams. Please, you gotta catch a flight, but come back, update us. It's a serious issue, and like I said, DC. I work in DC. I drink that water, so.
Oh man, you gotta be careful.
Yeah, I'm not trying to die out here, man. But this has been great. I learned a lot.
Yeah, me too, man. Most stuff. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you.
It's been a long week for you.
Yeah,
safe flights back to Memphis, Tennessee. Hopefully we'll visit Memphis someday.
Yeah. Please do. Don't be afraid. We're great people. It's a great city.
I'm gonna come for the music. But now, if you enjoyed this episode, let us know on all social media platforms. That's SITM Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Or you can just shoot us an email if you got a saying guest referred. That's SITM Podcast 237. Hey, kid, man, what's on your mind?
Man, I don't even know what's on my mind. I'm thinking about that water thing, man. It's still like
it's deep.
It's deep. That cooking, cooking with bottles of water. Yeah, that thing is disturbing, man.
Man.
But yeah.
We appreciate the work you're doing, and
Thank you.
Keep
going at it. Yeah, this is Stuck in Middle Podcast,
and we out.
Yes, sir.